So recently I have gone deeper into the teachings of Ramesh Balsekar, and I came to him originally because I was always a fan of Leonard Cohen, and I had heard that Leonard Cohen's depression lifted, and I was curious what lifted Leonard Cohen's depression. For those of you who know or don't know, Leonard was a poet and a singer interested in mysticism and all sorts of songs with depth, but he also kind of had this self obsession. He was also a Virgo like me, and despite all of his wisdom, his lifelong depression got lifted at some point. And for a long time I thought that it was like the Zen monastery that he went to, but it was actually the teacher after his time at the Zen monastery, Ramesh Balsekar. He's comes out of the Vedanta school of Hinduism, Advaita Vedanta, non-dualism. And he was a student of Nisargadatta, who was a real famous guru. And anyways, Balsekar has this very interesting view where, and it's really bizarre to think about, but the more you look at it, the more you get into it, the more it starts to seem completely and utterly true, to almost this kind of mind-blowing way, because it's basically telling a story about how the way things are and describing the way things are. And it's not necessarily a belief or a doctrine, that you go around and profess faith in. It's nothing of that sort, nor is it necessarily like a bunch of kind of academics trying to understand the science of mysticism. It's more trying to understand it from our own selves and from what it looks from our vantage point. Now, that's not to say it's not true in all those ways I just described, because I do believe it is true. But the point is to integrate it on such a deep level and to let the teaching sink in on such a deep level that it's almost as if it kind of realigns mind, body, and soul, so to speak. Um, so the teaching is actually very simple at its core, and it basically is the fact that we're all just basically divinely programmed objects, and everything in time space has been predestined, and no individual has control over their actions, nor choice, nor free will. And it's actual, and every person is being led closer to God and to awaken to God, and every person's going to awaken in their own time, and they are where they are on their road to awakening to God. And so the root of suffering, and some mystics might call this the root of separation between us and God, is the belief in free will. So original sin is the belief in free will, not free will, because there is no free will, but it's actually the belief in free will. And what this teaching does is it's almost like it forces you to surrender. It forces you to surrender because you start to see the way things are, and you realize that you've been surrendered all along. You've just been basically fooling yourself, thinking you had some control or some say in the matter. So it's actually easier than trying to surrender. So many mystics and good spiritual teachers will basically come down, at the end of the day, this is just a surrender game. This is just a game of letting go, basically. And this teaching does that, but this teaching does that in a way where the more you start to see things this way, everything is predestined, Everybody is just a programmed object. So that means I'm a programmed object. I was destined to come and give this video and give this teaching, and you are destined to hear it. And one of Balsekar's students actually has some just brilliant, very valuable satsangs where he's basically talking to groups of people on retreats he gives. His name is Roger Castillo. You could look up Roger Castillo and see some of his satsangs, and he goes into deep levels about this teaching and how you can look at it from all sorts of different angles, because the more you start to realize it's true and the more you see it for yourself, and that's the whole point, to eventually see it for yourself. You know, although I will say at first, when I first heard this teaching, I had to kind of try it on myself. And there is a kind of good feeling if you try it on, you know, and that may be the initial kind of spice that gets you hooked, so to speak. You are just a divinely programmed object. Everything is predestined. You have no free will, and it is your destiny, you know, to wake up and return to God. And actually, it's God waking up in you. You're not doing anything. And so the belief in free will pragmatically kind of gives rise to this idea of personal doership. I am doing this, and you are doing this. I am giving you a video, and you are watching the video, and you are thinking thoughts. And that's not true. See, that's not true. I'm not really doing anything. I actually had no choice. Everything since the beginning of time, since the divine plan, filtering through into time, space, through the Big Bang, through evolution, through genes, and then into my genes, and then into my conditioning this lifetime. Roger Castillo calls it up-to-date conditioning. Through my up-to-date conditioning, everything has brought me to do this video on YouTube. It wasn't necessarily a good idea or a bad idea. It wasn't a right doing or a wrong doing. It's basically just what is happening through me. It's the divine plan happening through me. And whatever you think about this video is basically the divine plan happening through you. You are a programmed object, as am I. And we have no choice in any of this. And we have no control over our actions, and we have no responsibility over our actions. And you hear those things, and perhaps you think that is just, you know, that's just nuts. But remember, it's not. This is something to integrate on a deep internal level. You know, we're not basically doing it as a political philosophy, saying like, oh, nobody's responsible for any of their actions, you know, all this stuff about personal responsibility. Oh man, y'all really missed the boat there. Which is true, but it's also true that we live in a time-space world, and you know, we live in this society, and we encounter it all of the time. And all of life happens through this world that we live in. So the interesting thing about this teaching, though, is that it opened my eyes to an aspect of the spiritual path that I believe I had overlooked a little bit, because there's a sense in mysticism and meditation and waking up and anything that it's all kinds of, it's basically the way you do it, whatever your path is or whatever you think it is or whatever you've come to, you know, there seems to be this idea the way you get there is, you know, these exercises, these practices, and there's such a kind of putting down of any sort of intellectualism that, you know, for a long time I just want to have a kind of Zen mind or cloud of unknowing mind where it's just like, I don't know. I don't know, or, it's unknown. And that's good. That's good in the sense that it can really open you up to what they may call the witness. The witness being what's behind your thoughts, watching your thoughts, watching your body. It's kind of one step removed. And it's usually kind of first realized in people when they kind of have some first big mystical experience, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, I see, I can just kind of observe my thoughts. I don't have to attach to any of these. I can just kind of observe my body and my body's sensations, and everything kind of happening. And then that comes into a kind of a whole kind of groove of perception that doesn't necessarily need the mind. You can kind of get into that zone of being where you're perceiving without really using the mind. You're focusing your attention in a way that's not really in the stream of thoughts. You're just kind of maybe ignoring your thoughts, or going around thoughts, or seeing thoughts. And maybe many of you have come to this, maybe many of you haven't. But the interesting thing is that's not the whole thing. That's not. It's going to be hard to witness your way into some sort of integrated enlightenment, simply because our body minds, as the Balsekar saying, is a body-mind mechanism, or Vedanta will just talk about the body-mind, just being your physical being, the body-mind. They are so conditioned that sometimes the witness watching the body-mind watches it and observes, everything happening with the body-mind, but at the same time, the witness isn't so comfortable with the body-mind. It's like they're not really syncing together too well. So the interesting thing about this teaching is that it almost kind of reconditions the body-mind and kind of almost realigns it with the witness. And even more than that, it's been my experience that the more this teaching is truly seen, and you truly start to discover it for yourself, the more it can naturally kind of pop you into the witness, So, and it can kind of work under the surface. So even when you first hear it and think about it and try it on or feel into it, everything's controlled by God. We're programmed objects. There's no free will, and it's the belief in our free will that is actually the root of all suffering, whether it's fear, shame, anger, tension, anxiety, whatever it is. It's all the root of all of that is the belief in free will that is deeply, deeply, deeply embedded in us. Like, as deep as it can go, it's embedded. And to upend that belief in free will, that belief in personal doership, will actually start to release all this kind of negative stuff that's pent up. And to upend it, it's to truly see into this teaching and start to begin to see things all the time, through the lens of this teaching, until you see, oh wow, this really is the way it is. And that can start off, and it can feel a little bit like intellectualizing, what Balsekar calls the thinking mind, but it eventually kind of sinks into the working mind. So it over time gradually becomes automatic. So I encourage you to check out anything you can find on Balsekar and Roger Castillo. And I may be making some more videos on this, because this is just some really powerful stuff here. And thanks for watching. Hope all of y'all are well.